Great. Hello, everyone. I'm Cameo George, the executive producer of American Experience, PBS's flagship and longest running history series. Thank you for joining us tonight. I am thrilled to be here tonight with acclaimed filmmaker Stanley Nelson for this event, Documenting the Struggle. This conversation is produced in partnership with the World Channel. So thank you, World Channel. Tonight, we'll talk about 3 American Experience films that focus on and document the African American struggle for equality in the United States. All 3 films, The Murder of Emmett Till, 3-time Emmy Award-winning Freedom Riders, and Freedom Summer, were lovingly directed by Stanley. Each film is a chapter in the fight for racial equality and recognition that continues to this day. We'll examine how these stories of persistent resistance are still relative today, and we'll talk about how public media can better empower filmmakers of color in telling these stories, helping to provide context and a truer representation of our collective American history. I invite you to write questions for Stanley and me in the chat box. We'll try to answer as many as possible during the discussion. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge our corporate sponsors, Liberty Mutual Insurance and Consumer Cellular. I'd also like to acknowledge the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Arthur Vining Davis Foundation, the Yawkey Foundation, Ford Foundation, Robert D.L. Gardner Foundation, members of the Documentary Investment Group, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, our home station, GBH Boston, and PBS for their generous support of this project. And now, the reason you're all here, it is my privilege to introduce Stanley Nelson, a 2002 MacArthur Genius Fellow and founder of Firelight Films. For Stanley's commitment to compelling narratives filled with deeply researched historical detail, he has received an individual Peabody Award, the 2016 Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, and the National Medal in the Humanities from President Barack Obama. Stanley's latest film, which he knows I love, Miles Davis, Birth of the Cool, provides the definitive look at the life and career of the iconic jazz musician. Stanley, thank you so much for being here tonight.
No, it's great to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. So as I said, we're going to show clips and have a discussion kicked off by 3 of your iconic films. I want to talk about why you made these films, the lessons that still resonate today, the things that are important takeaways in those films. And I want to talk about the importance of being a filmmaker of color and telling these stories.
Great, sure.
Okay, so we're going to start off with a clip from The Murder of Emmett Till. But before we do, can you tell us about this film and about this story?
Sure. We made Emmett Till. We're actually finishing up the first film that we did for American Experience called Marcus Garvey, Look for Me in the Whirlwind. And we were finishing up that film, and we started thinking in the edit room about what else we could do with American Experience, because we like the experience. And we started thinking, and we started thinking about Emmett Till. And I was working with African American editor Louis Erskine, who actually he edited Freedom Riders also. And so we were thinking about what to do, and I said, what about Emmett Till? And he talked about how the murder of Emmett Till kind of changed his life. And I realized that it also was very important to me. And I started looking into it just very quickly, and I realized that Emmett Till died in 1955, I think it was. And so, and at that point I was 4 years old. So I thought I remembered it, but I didn't, And Lewis said the same thing, that he thought he had remembered it, but he's even a few years younger than me. So so it was this amazing event that we kind of meant a lot to all of us. The story of Emmett Till was, Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy from Chicago who went to visit his uncle in Mississippi, a place called a little town called Money, Mississippi. And his mother told him, you got to be careful when you go down to Mississippi. He was from Chicago, and him and his friends down in Mississippi are hanging out, and this white woman comes into the store, and nobody knows really what happened. His friends say that he actually did whistle at her. you know um Other people say he didn't whistle, but I don't think it matters one way or the other. But later that night, the woman's husband and his uncle came and pulled Emmett out of the house and murdered him. And his body was found in the Tallahatchie River a few days later. And the big thing about it was his mother had the body brought back to Chicago, and they had an open casket funeral. And it was just this seminal event for especially African Americans all over the country, because Jet magazine published pictures of Emmett Till, and the the corrupted body of this young boy. And in some ways, it was one of the things that kicked off the civil rights movement. It's a lot more complicated and an amazing story than that. The two men who murdered Emmett Till were actually put on trial, which was amazing, in Mississippi. They were put on trial and they were acquitted. And after they were acquitted, they did an article for Look magazine where they admitted killing him. And they were never brought to trial again, because of what's called, double jeopardy. But there were ways that they could have been brought to trial, but Mississippi wasn't going to do that. So that's kind of the quick story of the murder of Emmett Till.
Mhm. So this clip that we're about to show, we're going to hear from Mamie Till. So we'll play the clip and then we'll talk about it some more on the other side.
No one ever did time for the killing of the 14-year-old black boy from Chicago. But his murder and the trial and acquittal of his killers sent a powerful message. If change was going to come, people would have to put themselves on the line. Contributions to civil rights groups soared. And 100 days after the death of Emmett Till, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white person, and the Montgomery bus boycott began.
When people saw what had happened to my son, men stood up who had never stood up before. People became vocal who had never vocalized before. Emmett's death was the opening of the civil rights movement. He was the sacrificial lamb of the movement.
Okay. So Stanley, I know that you can't see the clip that we played, but one of the things that just struck me so much in watching this clip in preparation for this discussion, there's a soundbite of Mamie Till Mobley saying that after seeing these images of her son and as you said, his corrupted body, she says, men stood up who had never stood up before. People were vocal who had never been vocal before. Can you talk a little bit more about what this image of Emmett Till did and how, as you said, that galvanized the movement in such a remarkable way?
Yeah, I mean, you have to understand the image. So many people have seen it. One of the things that Jet Magazine has done was every year on the anniversary, they republish the picture of Emmett Till. But his body had been in the water for days, and so it was bloated and it was just horrible. And what had been done to this 14-year-old boy was there was no possible excuse for it. So, it just, and Mamie, in all her bravery, buried him with an open casket funeral, and also because it was she had the body shipped back to Chicago, the lines to view this murdered boy, stretched around the block, and there's footage, of women actually fainting, just falling out. They look at the coffin and just fall out. And there's just hundreds of Black people that file into the church and go and look at the body, and it made African American people, as someone says in the film, understand what we were up against, and it was the personification of what was going on, in this country. So it was a very, very meaningful piece, in the civil rights movement, and laying the foundation. One of the things that we found was that Emmett Till was 14. And so for young Black people all over the country who are around that age, okay, these people were around 14, 15, 13, and this is 1955. These are the people who in 61 with the Freedom Rides, 62, with Freedom Summer, who were the core of the civil rights movement in the 60s. Young people who were his age, and realized that, they could be murdered at any time. It's really interesting because I think one of the things that I've seen, because I have 21-year-old kids, is that, young people, and they are really affected by these kind of things in a different way. So my children who are 21, I have 21-year-old twins and a 30-year-old, they're affected by, the murder of George Floyd and some of the things that happened in this country. I'm not saying we all aren't, we all are affected, but I think the way that it affects them, and realizing that they're vulnerable, and this is the world that they're just kind of coming to life in, and it really affects them. And it affected this generation who were young at the time that Emmett Till was murdered.
So you brought up George Floyd and the horrific murder of George Floyd, which is another, I almost hate to use this word iconic, but just one of those images that's, once you see it, it's seared in your brain. You cannot forget it. It's so horrible that it just, you can't unsee it. How do you think about the way that images are shown in news media when it comes to these kinds of stories?
I think one of the images are incredibly important. The reason why Emmett Till took on the importance that it did was, one, because Mamie left the coffin open, but two, because Johnson Publications with Jet Magazine published those photos and let people know. Emmett Till was not the first by any means young person or person who was murdered, lynched, in the South. But what happened before that is the newspapers in the South, the white newspapers, didn't cover it. The Black newspapers had a very limited scope. These were local papers, but this became a national story, and Emmett Till became a symbol of the South. And I think the other thing that happened, was when the two guys go on trial for the murder. The northern press flocked down to the South to cover this trial. And we talked to some of those reporters. They're in the film, and they were just shocked because the courtroom looked like something out of To Kill a Mockingbird. The fans are going on, and the defendants are drinking Cokes out of the bottle, and it's just crazy. And slapping, and hugging their relatives. And the reporters, the white reporters who aren't from there, are shocked that this is the South and this is the way it really is. So and so it exposed kind of this other side of America that wasn't talked about, in any real terms.
And again, it's so interesting in this spring what we've all been experiencing with the killing of George Floyd. We have Emmett Till all those decades ago. We have, unfortunately, countless crimes that have happened since then until now, and yet we still have people saying, "I didn't know it was this bad," or "I can't believe something like that happened." And so, with your experience working on Emmett Till, your experience seeing George Floyd, and your experience just living in America, how did you react when you heard people saying, "We just didn't know it was that bad"?
You know, I think I think none of us, you know, I mean, I can't say, oh yeah, I knew it was that bad. I mean, you know, you know, it's kind of like you know, as African American, you keep getting slapped in the face by, you know how bad things really are, you know, and you think, okay, but I do think that you know the political situation in this country has made everything worse, you know, and made you know just these things, it's made racism, more acceptable in a lot of ways to a lot of people, and made racist acts, more the norm. So I think that that's also part of it. Can't hear you.
Sorry, I know we're going to talk about this a little bit more later, but in the face of what we're living through now, in the face of the history that you've documented, what do you think your role is as a filmmaker, as a documentarian?
I think my role is to try to tell the truth, to try to make well researched, accurate stories, to make stories that are entertaining. I mean, that's something that we don't like to talk about, because I want to be a serious filmmaker. We all want to, but you have to make films that are entertaining. You have to make stories that people want to watch. You have to figure out how to do that. Part of what I try to do is like get out of the way and tell the story in the most entertaining, artistic way I can, but it's kind of back up. I don't want the film is not about me. Film is about the murder of Emmett Till. It's not about Stanley Nelson, what Stanley Nelson thinks about the murder of Emmett Till, or at least that's what we're trying to project. That's what we want you to leave. I want you to leave the theater thinking that this is a story about the murder of Emmett Till, and you're moved by it, and that that you're entertained by it, and I want the audience to be engaged every step of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important, to how do you engage the audience, like for every moment of the film. And so there's not this kind of up and down, but that they're engaged, and they're with you, and that they're discovering part of the story. I can tell you a little some funny thing that's an example of that. One of the things that when the guys who murdered Emmett Till admitted, and they actually wrote this article in Look magazine. This guy interviewed them, and they talked about the murder, and they said, yeah, he was wearing crepe sole shoes, right? And we burned his clothes, but you know how hard those shoes are to burn. That crepe just doesn't burn. And so we knew that going in because we read the thing, and we found a classmate of Emmett Till's in Chicago. And she talked about how the women wore pleated skirts and the men wore tight pants or something. And I said, well, did they wear crepe sole shoes? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, tell me that. And she said, and the young men wore crepe sole shoes. And so early in the film, she tells that story, and she says, and they wore pleated skirts and crepe sole shoes and blah 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 blah. And then later on in the film, when they talk about the murder, they say, and he had crepe sole shoes. Now we in the film, we never say anything else about it.
Mhm.
And one of the things that happens as an audience is like you discover that, or you feel like you've discovered, oh, I remember earlier that they wore crepe sole shoes, and now these guys are talking about how hard they are to burn,
Mhm.
and we just let that moment be that moment, and that's a moment where the audience feels like they're discovering something and they're part of the story, and that's really important.
Mhm, mhm. Can you talk a little bit more about those amazing moments of discovery while you're in the process of putting a film together? I think sometimes people think that, well, sometimes you do, you go into a documentary, clearly you have a thesis, you know what it is, you know the story that you're trying to tell. But then there are also times where you are finding out things along the way, and there are things that you did not expect that suddenly take on more importance for you. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, documentary for me as a filmmaker is always just discovering stuff, and that's kind of how you're on the right track when stuff starts falling just out of the sky or just falling into place. The woman that I'm talking about who knew Emmett Till and talked about the clothes, we were actually the first day this is our first day of filming, and it was really creepy because we were filming in the funeral home in Chicago that he was brought to, and so we're filming the guy who actually was there, the undertaker was there, who accepted his body. um we found, and we were interviewing him in the funeral home, and we break to go to lunch, and the receptionist says, she's an older woman. She says, "Oh, what are you guys doing?" We're making a film about Emmett Till. She says, "Oh yeah, he was in my class in school." We're like, "What?" We're like, "Yeah, he was in my class." And we said, "Okay, can we interview you after lunch?" And she says, "Yeah." And she tells us, the story about the clothes and the crepe sole shoes. She also tells us like what kind of person Emmett Till was that you never got anywhere else. She was like, he was a jokester. He just liked to make jokes and stuff like that, and blah blah blah. And it was one of those crazy discoveries. And she helps you understand why he might be this kind of 14-year-old kid who goes down to Mississippi, who doesn't believe, when people say, you got to watch how you act there. He's from Chicago. He's like, and why he might, whistle at a white woman because he thought it was funny, so it's those kind of discoveries that, along the way, um, just, make the film that much deeper and that much richer.
When you're making the film, or when you were making this film, did you know how important it was going to be? And did you have any aspirations for how it would be received? I mean, obviously, yes, you hope that it's well received, but were you thinking, okay, I really have to focus on these details because this is this is the definitive story on Emmett Till, and there are generations who will come up who don't know this story and need to know this story?
Yeah, I mean, I think in most of the films that I mean, I'm thinking that in a way, I'm wanting to do the story justice. I'm wanting to do all the things that we talked about before. But I try not to think of the word definitive, because it just means, it seems like, definitive is like stuck in molasses somewhere. I'm like, I'm making the definitive film, and I we try to, one of the things I try to do it in all of the films is have some humor in them, believe it or not, because I think that these are very serious subjects, and so one of the things that we do in editing is anytime we have somebody say something that's kind of funny, we keep it in until the last moment. That's the final cut. Okay, we got to take this out, but we try to make those things work. But I think that part of it is that, yeah, I think that I'm making the only film about Emmett Till, or the only film about freedom riders, or the only film about Miles Davis, or whatever. I'm just trying to tell the story right. I'm trying not to make that be a burden that makes me tell the story in any one way. I don't want to be too serious. I don't want to be too definitive. But I'm trying to, I know that this might be the only film on that subject, for a long while.
This idea that you don't want to have this burden, do you feel like it is inevitable as a filmmaker of color telling these stories that there is a burden or an undue burden on you and on other filmmakers of color?
No, I mean, I think that as a filmmaker, if you want to put that burden on yourself, you can, but that's your problem. I think you want to try to get away from that. Look, I mean, the way I make films, and what I'm doing, it's just the way I make films. I mean, there's a lot of other ways to make them. You know what I mean? You can make a first person, film about, the murder of Emmett Till. I remember when I was a young boy and I first saw the story. There's a million ways you could make the same story. So I think the burden or that you put on yourself is what you put on yourself to, but I look at it as a gift. I mean, that I am able to make these stories that are really important to me, and if they're, I think they're really important stories, and not only important stories for Black folks. These are important stories for white folks. These are important stories for the world. That's how I look at it. Like, these are great stories that we should know. And we've been very lucky that a lot of the stories have like these really kind of intricate ins and outs, and kind of roller coaster ride through these stories that make them kind of exciting.
Okay, I'm going to move forward to the next film that we're going to talk about, Freedom Riders. Can you set up Freedom Riders for us?
Yeah, Freedom Riders took place in 1961, I believe. 1961, Freedom Riders. And this was at the beginning of the civil rights movement, and there was this thought among leaders of the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King and others, that you couldn't go into the Deep South, right? You could keep it in what they call the Upper South, South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, maybe, like those kind of places, but you could not go, to Mississippi, Alabama. Maybe you could go to Atlanta, but you couldn't go to the rest of Georgia. It wasn't time yet. And this group of people led by the organization CORE said, we're just going to, we're going to get on Greyhound buses and Trailways buses. There were 13 of them originally, 6 on one, 7 on the other. And we're just, and they had segregated buses. And once they hit, the Mason-Dixon line, then, the Black people had to sit in the back, white people in the front. But that was already illegal. It was illegal to do that, but the bus companies were still doing that. And so they said, we're just going to get on and we're not going to move. And the white people and the Black people will sit together, in the front of the bus or wherever they want on the bus. And we'll just go down. And they go down. And from DC, they get on 6 on the Trailway, 7 on the Greyhound, the other way around, I don't remember. But they just go down. They have no protection. The only news news that's with them is the Black press. There were 2 reporters from Black newspapers, but that's it. And they just go down. And they were trying to get to. They're going to go through the South, through Georgia, through Alabama, through Mississippi, and end up in New Orleans. For those who haven't seen the film, see it. They didn't make it. They didn't make it.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to play a clip, and then on the other side of that, we'll continue talking about Freedom Riders.
The idea of the Freedom Rides is a really radical idea. The idea of going into Mississippi and going into Alabama and challenging segregation so frontally and so aggressively in many ways is something that alarmed not only those who oppose civil rights, but those within the civil rights community.
They thought it was too confrontational, that it was going to backfire. It was going to set the movement back. It was too risky. Corps just didn't have the resources or the skill or the know-how about the inner workings of Jim Crow and racism and how to fight it in the Deep South. And that was very likely that they would get arrested, they might get beaten up, they might even get killed.
May I have a cup of coffee, please?
Now, look, I don't want any niggers in here. I don't...
Nigger, what are you doing in here? Don't you know?
The training that we did in Washington, D.C. prior to the time the writers got on the buses was largely devoted to trying to see how the person is going to react.
Are you with this fella?
Why, yes, we're both interstate bus passengers.
Where are you from?
I'm from the United States.
By using nonviolence, people see the contrast between your dignified, disciplined confrontation of the wrong and then the reaction of violence. No way of confusing that confrontation.
You move?
No, I don't move when I'm in the right.
Well, then we'll
The Freedom Rides, I think, typified one of the standard contradictions within the civil rights movement. On the one hand, it's nonviolent, doesn't hit back when hit. On the other hand, they're really courting violence in order to attract publicity that will forward the cause. And so you have these mixed motives. Let's hope nothing happens, nobody's hurt. On the other hand, suppose something does happen, wouldn't that in an ironic way be good for us?
get out. Move out.
People at CORE thought maybe some bad things will happen, but I don't think they imagined anywhere near the kind of level of violence that they'd meet in Anniston and Birmingham and in Montgomery.
It was make-believe, and it did not scare me, perhaps because it was make-believe, and I wasn't sure I'd really have to use all these techniques. With our nonviolent behavior and our goodwill, I thought we could do anything.
Do you expect any trouble?
There is a possibility that we will not be served at some stops. There is a possibility that we might be arrested. This is the only trouble that I anticipate.
I'm taking a trip on the Greyhound bus line. I'm riding the front seat to Nolens this time. Hallelujah, I'm a-traveling. Hallelujah, ain't it fine? Hallelujah, I'm a-traveling down freedom's main line.
The first day getting on the bus, it was a good feeling. It was a good feeling. We were together, it was comradeship, it was a good cause. And we were going for the movement, you know, and we were going for the people.
Boarding that Greyhound bus to travel through the heart of the Deep South, I felt good. I felt happy. I felt liberated. I was like a soldier in a nonviolent army. I was ready.
So Stanley, right before we went into the clip, you talked about how what was so interesting, amazing, novel about the Freedom Rides is that, and the writers, was that they were planning to go farther south than people had before. One of the other really amazing things that we see and that we learn about in this clip is that there were a lot of people who thought that what they were doing was too risky, too provocative, and almost courting violence. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, they were doing something that the traditional civil rights movement had not done yet, which was going into the deep South. And what happens after this piece is that Martin Luther King and others basically tell them no, if I were you, I wouldn't keep going. And in some ways, they might have been a bit naive. That first group of freedom riders, and kind of zealots, In the other thing that there's the piece in there where someone says, but that's part of what they wanted. They wanted this kind of confrontation. They were almost, they didn't want violence to happen, but in some ways they needed something to happen to put them on the map. And so it's a very interesting strategy. And I love that clip that's in the film, because it lays that bare, something that people kind of talk around, but it's we don't really want violence, but we almost need it for this thing to succeed.
So I have a question from our audience on Facebook. Someone asked, when choosing to include violent images or footage, how do you gauge how much to use and for how long? Do you worry about traumatizing the audience? So we're talking about freedom riders. In some ways, they're courting the violence because they know how powerful that image is going to be.
The very example of that would be Emmett Till, because there's the image of him in Jet magazine, and it was an image of his body that it's horrible. And we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how much to show. His mother in the film, Mamie Till, describes, she tells the story of going into the funeral home and seeing his body. She describes it in vivid detail, that she started at his feet and then, looked up his body, and she describes it. And so, we cut that scene, and one of the things that we did, because we couldn't judge it anymore, we would call in the mailman or the mailwoman or the FedEx guy would be making a delivery. We'd say, okay, could you just come in and watch this scene? just, okay, is that too much? What do you think? And we had
if they didn't faint, it was fine.
Right? So we had other people watch, because, at some point, you kind of grow insensitive to that stuff, because you've seen it so many times. But it was really important for us to show you, what people were fainting about, and what incensed so much of the country. We could not show it. But we also didn't want it to be gratuitous. We didn't want you to kind of get pissed off at us, which would happen if we showed you too much. So yeah, I mean, those things are always things that you think about. But frankly, that happened in Emmett Till. In most of these scenes, especially from that era, the violence, you don't really exactly see it. It's not like there's someone there with a phone camera, showing this cop, putting his knee on this guy's neck for 8.5 minutes. That's not what's there. So it's very different. So most of the time, you don't have that problem, with historical docs.
Can you talk a little bit about how the protesters themselves were perceived by the country at that time? Again, they're worried. Some of the older leaders are afraid that they're going to be perceived as rabble rousers or provocateurs. There are other people who are like, they're freedom fighters. Clearly, they're doing something to help all of us.
I mean, one of the most amazing things, about freedom riders, especially for me as a filmmaker and for us making the film, is there was no perception of the first group, because there was no press. I mean, there was nobody was covering. I mean, these are 13 people, 7 of them get on one bus, 6 of them get on the other in DC, and they just start riding on the bus. These aren't special buses. These are like, can I get a ticket to Mississippi, please? Can I get it? And they just were riding. And the only press, again, that was with them, there were 2 reporters from Black newspapers. And that was it. And so there was no perception of them at all. Once the violence starts happening, when they get to Alabama, then the press starts covering them. And so then I mean they were looked at as incredibly brave, by most people, incredibly stupid by some other people. I mean, the South looked at them like, well, what do you think was going to happen? But again, I mean, what's really important is that we understand that all they were doing was sitting next to each other on a bus. That's all they were doing. And one of the buses was firebombed. I mean, they were beaten. We could, I don't want to blow the film for those who haven't seen it, but you have to see the film. But and after that, the press now was following it because the violence was there, because there was something there to follow. And now the press floods in. There's these great shots of where the bus is firebombed outside of Anniston, Alabama, that are incredible. I mean, they're incredible. And one of the things that people down there told us, they said, well, the guy who took those pictures, he was a photographer for the paper here, but he was Italian and he wasn't from here. That's why, so they were like, look, any Southerner worth his salt would not have even taken those pictures. But this guy didn't know the kind of, he was just a photographer. And he was like, okay, well, they're burning the bus. I'm going to take the pictures. And so he took these incredible series. I mean, they're incredible series of photos of the bus being torched and burned.
I want to, because you said you don't want to spoil the film, I just want to remind everyone that these 3 titles that we're talking about, these 3 films, are available to stream in full at americanexperience.org. So if you have not seen them, or if you've seen them but haven't seen them in a long time, please go to our site and watch them. I have another question for you from the audience on Facebook. Have the recent Black Lives Matter protests inspired you to consider telling the history of any specific moments that you think have renewed importance for today's national conversation?
I'm working on a number of things. I'm not sure what the question means, if they're talking about historical stories or present day stories. We're working on a film about Tulsa, the Tulsa massacres that we're just starting, and a bunch of other things. I'm not working on a film about George Floyd and what's happening right now. I mean, I think that there's everybody I saw marching, it looked like they had their phone up and was filming. So there's going to be a bunch of films about that and about what happened. And I know people who are out there with their cameras shooting and stuff like that. So there'll be out there. We're actually developing a project on police and the history of African Americans and the police, because I think that's really important, that we understand that this is not something new, that this is what the police were created to do. They were created to keep Black people in their place. They were not created to protect and serve Black people. That's, and that's just the history of it. And so we're working on a film developing a film that will talk about that long contentious history of African Americans in the police.
Another question from Facebook. In your Lifetime Achievement Award acceptance speech in 2016, you challenged the audience to step outside your comfort zone and to hire people who don't look like you. In 2020, has the media landscape improved for people of color in positions to make media and tell diverse stories?
I think it's improved. I think it's, it hasn't nearly gone to where it needs to go, but I think one of the interesting things about George Floyd is it's made people who are aware, and by definition, people in the media are kind of, aware of what's going on. It's made people look around, in a way that they never did before, and say, "Whoa, wait a minute," and so, people are being hired, in leadership positions, but these are people who should have been hired a long time ago, and leader. I mean, it's not like they're hiring some unqualified person, but I think, for the moment, I mean, and that's what, I don't know what white people talk about, because I not, in a group of white people, but I'm a group of black people. Black people all talk about, well, how long is this going to last? That's what black people talk about constantly. Okay, people are very caring, and kind of, looking around and saying, oh my God, there's no black people here, and they're also looking at other, well, there's no, wait, there's no women here either. There's nobody Latino, Latinx here either. Wait, 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 there's nobody gay here. I mean, all these things are, our people are sorry to look around, but who knows, how long that's going to last, and that's something that at least, among people, I know everybody does about. But yeah, I mean, I think that things, there's a slight improvement, but look, I mean, this country is going to be so much better when all people tell their stories, and people tell their own stories. People are able to dive down, deeper into the stories, because the stories are coming out of their own culture. When we made Emmett Till, we went to Sundance with the film, and this white filmmaker, on the cheese line or some party, said, "Oh man, I'm glad you made that film, because I wish I could have made it. I really wanted to make that film." What does his Emmett Till film look like? Emmett Till did not. The images of Emmett Till did not stick with him all his life, like it did for me, like it did for Louis Erskine, like it did for other people who were involved in that film.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I feel like I know what you're going to say, but should filmmakers who are not of color be making these stories too?
No. I don't think so. No. I mean, look, everybody's always like equivocating. Well, blah, blah. No, I mean, no. I mean, I'm not going to make a story about, a Jewish cantor or somebody like that. I mean, why would I, like, what? No. I mean, make stories about your own communities. I mean, you guys are the only ones who can talk to, those racist cops, right? You guys can go, and talk to, people that I can't, talk to, and you have your own stories. It's so amazing how many people, like, why do white folks constantly want to make stories, about people of color? They have their own stories, and we need those stories. We need to hear those stories, because I don't understand. I'm like, what? And I want to, like, what's going on? So anyway, I don't think so. I mean, I think at this point, we've gone down that road, and that's what that's to me, is one really, good example of white privilege. When people talk about white privilege, that's what white privilege is. Like I am a blank slate. I come in there, I don't have any bias. I'm just, I'm white. I'm like white, and I don't have, I can make a film about anything I want, But also, look, you have white folks have, access to the power, access to, resources, So I think it's time that, white filmmakers need to make a film about white folks.
So I know that we have to get to our clip on Freedom Summer, but I feel like this is a really good point for me to ask you about Firelight Films and the goal that that you and Marcia set out with when you founded it?
Yeah, I mean, well, you know, look, we found Five Films, which is like 20 years ago now. You know, we started out as a Firelight Media. It was a nonprofit company. We were gonna make films. You know, that's what we do. I had already been making films for 20 years or whatever it was. You know, maybe more. I don't know. But we're gonna, just make films. And then we we started finding that we were being asked to mentor filmmakers. Were coming to us, and we found that all filmmakers are asked to do that, but filmmakers of color are asked to do that more than other filmmakers. So I mean, I literally would have black filmmakers call me up, say, that I didn't know, I'm getting out of college, in 2 weeks, can I, come work with you, or can I come talk to you? And talking to other filmmakers, of color, they were having the same thing. And so we started, we kind of split off. So Firelight Films does the production, of Firelight Media is a nonprofit. And our main thing is this documentary lab, which is in its 11th year. I think we have like 100 people who have graduated, and we've won every award except the Academy Award, but we're working on that. But we won a Sundance Award this year. We've won other awards at Sundance, and Emmys and Peabodys and all those things, and these are, filmmakers who are making their first or second film. And our mission is to help them, get that first or second film made. As we say, our mission is to get them, that first, second film out under their belt, and have, people be able to, buy their groceries and pay their rent from making films, and to get a whole new cadre of filmmakers out there. And we're really proud of that it's been working. We just started another program, the William Greaves Fund, which is to help filmmakers make their second or third film. It's kind of more for mid-career filmmakers, and so we're working on that. We're trying to change the industry one step at a time, in our little way, in whatever way we can, because people have stories to tell, and they're good at it. I mean, that's the thing that amazed me, that we found we got just great filmmakers. And so it's really exciting. Look, when you're working with a filmmaker and they're making their first film and it's going to Sundance, it's like it's exciting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're doing it, and we all need to catch up.
Yeah.
We all need to catch up. I'm going to jump ahead to Freedom Summer, because time is running short. Tell us about Freedom Summer.
Freedom Summer was, I forget the year, sorry, but a year or so after Freedom Riders, and it was the plan was to kind of flood the South with young college students, white and black, who would volunteer to go into the South, into Mississippi. I believe it was mainly Mississippi, and register people to vote. And it was a simple plan. We're going to go down there and we're going to just, register people to vote. And again, it was one of those things where they knew that, if they brought white college students down there, that the media would follow, and that there would be attention on them. What happened was they were in a training session. So they were all trained at a university in Ohio, and they went there for training, kind of like the training that you saw in Freedom Riders. So they went there for training, and 2 or 3 of them had to leave early to get back down south for something. And those 3, and the program hadn't even started, those 3 disappeared, and later were found that they had been murdered. I think the scene you're going to see is the eulogy for James Chaney, who actually was African American and was from that area. And so he was, even though he was part of Freedom Summer, he was actually from there. And he and 2 white guys who were with him, Schwerner and Goodman, were were murdered before it even started.
So we're going to roll that clip that you just talked about and then talk about it on the other side.
Great.
In Mississippi, a memorial service was held for James Chaney.
The decision had been made by family members and local leaders and others that they want to keep this very quiet and then low-key, rather, did their eulogy.
I want to talk about is really what I really grieve about. I don't grieve for Chaney because the fact I feel that he lived a fuller life than many of us would ever live. I feel that he's gotten his freedom. We're still fighting for it.
Dave Dennis's speech was a turning point in the summer because everybody wanted him to say the usual things that you would say at a funeral. And Dave Dennis just couldn't do it. He challenged the people at the memorial, and he challenged the whole movement.
You see, we all tired. You see, I know what's gonna happen. I feel it deep in my heart when they find the people who killed those guys in Neshoba County.
All the different emotions and things that have been going through leading up to this particular moment began to come out, boil up in, we might call this. And then looking out there and seeing Ben Chaney, James Chaney's little brother, I lost it. I totally just lost it.
Don't bow down anymore. Hold your heads up. We want our freedom now. I don't want to have to go to another memorial. Tired of funerals. Tired of it. Got to stand up.
So the clip that we just saw, Dave Dennis is giving the eulogy for James Chaney, as you said, and such a powerful moment. Going into it, people are wanting him to give a very buttoned up, sort of dignified tribute to his friend. And it's like he just gets overcome and needs to speak truth. What was it like talking to him about that moment?
It was incredible. I mean, Dave Dennis is an incredible human being. I mean, he's still out there fighting, I mean, he's still, he's still fiery. And so many of the people who were involved in the Freedom Rides and especially Freedom Summer, because they were so young, are still out there, fighting and pushing for change. So, it was great. Part of this whole thing, for me is just talking to these people that's just so incredibly great. One of the things for Freedom Summer and Freedom Riders was we traveled around, at screenings with Freedom Riders and the people who participated in Freedom Summer. And, we would be on the stage after the film talking, and they would be thanking me, for making the film. And every single time I would get teared up, and it was embarrassing because I would start crying, because I was like, look, there's no way I would be on this stage as an African-American director if it wasn't for you all risking your lives, and I'll start crying now. I can't thank you enough. Thank me. I made a freaking film. You risked your lives, and so it's just it's like this. I don't know. It's almost like an out of body experience, but it's to be around those people. And when we did Freedom, we did Freedom Riders, and we went to Sundance, and we had what they call a community screening in Salt Lake City, and they bus loads of high school students in there, bus out, and they're 95% white because it's Utah. And a bunch of the Freedom Riders were there, and I left. Bernard Lafayette, who's in the film, and Jim Zwerg, who's in the film, were there, and I had to run to another screening or something. And when I left, they were leading these kids in freedom songs, and they were all. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, so they're just amazing people.
One of the questions from the audience was about how you as a filmmaker really lean on the interviews and the voices as opposed to very heavy narration. Why is that so important? Like, what do we get from these people?
Right.
What's the opportunity there?
Okay, just remember that question because I'm going to go off a little bit. I think that one of the things that we learned when we did the Murder of Emmett Till, because the film that we did before that was about Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey looked for me in the whirlwind, and it kind of ended in 1923 or somewhere in there, 25. And we actually found some people who were Garveyites, who were still alive. I mean, this was, I should say, we made the film in the early 90s, but they were still, we found some Garveyites, but it was hard, and it was hard finding any kind of footage. There's one shot of footage of Marcus Garvey. It's like a 3-second shot of him in a car and he turns his head. When we made the Murder of Emmett Till, we found that there were people alive. There were people that we could talk to. The footage is great, all black and white and stuff. And people are talking about this time in their life that was hugely important. And, we realized that we had kind of struck some gold, that there's this era that is just gold. And so that, it really helped us in making Freedom Summer and Freedom Riders. And what was your question again?
Well, I kind of feel like you're talking about it. The question from the audience was about leaning so heavily on the interviews and letting people speak for themselves. And I feel like that's what you're talking about, that feeling that you struck gold when you find someone who can narrate for themselves.
Right. So Emmett Till has a narrator, and these films were all made for American Experience. But we made a film called Jonestown: The Life and Death of People's Temple for American Experience. And I remember, when we were talking about making the film, I remember sitting there and I said, I think we could make this film without narration. And they were like, because all their films had narration, like all the films had narration. And we were like, they're going to, argue about it. He said, we could do this. I think we could do this without narration. They were like, yeah. We're like, great. They love the idea. And so, pretty much all of our films since then have not relied, on narration. And I think, it gives the audience a different feeling because they're part of the film. You don't have somebody, saying, when Emmett Till, or whatever, you're being told the story by the people who are involved. It makes it a lot harder to make the film, and we try not to, and we try to go to in some ways, to where the interview takes us. So the interviews, we have a script, but we're going off. It's like, if you say I'm going to, drive from New York to California and I'm going to, take, a month to do it, or that's going to be my summer vacation. Well, you got to have a map, right, to get there. But, you might be like, oh, I'm going to take this side road here. That looks really nice. Or, hey, there's a sign there that says, I don't know, a witch's museum, and I want to see what the heck that is. So, so we want to be able to go off script, as long as it's part of the story. And So yeah.
Mhm. One of the things that I love about so many of your films, and particularly in Freedom Summer, it's this showcase and this spotlight on everyday Americans, like ordinary Americans who put themselves or are put into extraordinary circumstances. How important is it for you to tell stories about quote unquote ordinary people?
Yeah, I mean, I think that just, for me, it really appeals, in very general terms, more than what's they call the great man, theory of history, where there's this great man, and I mean, look, Martin Luther King's a great man, but I would much rather tell the story of the people who were from Selma, who were there and had to stay there after Martin Luther King left. And we're fighting and we're living under those conditions before he got there. And to me, those are the stories that are really important to me, and also the stories of movements. I mean, and the stories of institutions. But it's not like I've ever thought about this before. Before somebody interviewed me, and I was like, yeah, I guess. But so it's the Marcus Garvey movement, it's the Freedom Rides, it's it's Freedom Summer, it's Jonestown, it's the movement that the death of the murder of Emmett Till started. Those are I think for whatever reason what my films tend to be about.
Hmm. Stanley, are you an activist? Do you consider yourself an activist?
No, I consider myself a filmmaker.
No overlap?
I mean, yeah. I mean, if you want to consider me an activist, I'd be a pretty poor activist if that's what I am. I mean, I'm a filmmaker. No, I don't. I mean, I have no problem with that if somebody wants to think of me as an activist, but I think my decisions would be different, in life if I was I feel like an activist, I would spend more of my time activating rather than filmmaking. I don't know, but so.
Okay. I want to talk about, we're going to get to some more audience questions. I want to talk about the importance of public media. The 3 films that we're talking about, countless others you've made for public media. Why is that important, and what is the role of public media going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to understand the history, for me. I mean, when I started making films, which was a long time ago, when I was in film school, so we're talking about like 40 years ago, public media was the only people who were doing documentaries. This is before HBO. HBO didn't exist. The networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, which were the 3 networks that existed at that time, they did not hire independent filmmakers. If they wanted to make a film, they sent out their producers and their news people to make those films. So PBS was the one who was there. And I think in some ways that role has changed now that you got Netflix, Hulu, whatever. But there's so many differences. One, their bottom line, is to make money. I mean, that's finally, their bottom line, and that they can make good films, they can make bad films, they can do whatever, but they're there to make money. The other thing that is really important about that PBS that is very different is PBS works. Maybe it's because PBS doesn't have whatever the billions of dollars that Netflix has, but you really work to get your film seen and out there. You work with the communities to get your film out there. Also, what is it? It's like PBS is in like 98.7% of the households or some craziness like that. So everybody, you think everybody might have Netflix, but they don't. Everybody might have, Hulu, but they don't. But everybody pretty much does have PBS. Also, for us and our films, they've been just incredible. When we did the Black Panthers Vanguard of the Revolution, we kept we kept saying like, okay, so have you, what do you think? And they're like, oh yeah, it's great. We're like, are they watching this film? Because I don't know if they're even looking at it, because they were just like, oh yeah, just keep going, and
I think they had confidence in you.
yeah, I guess.
They're not watching.
Yeah, but we've been able to, make the films that we want to make. I think we made 7 or 8 films with American Experience, and they were great partners. I mean, it was always, they helped, as painful as it was sometimes, and I have to admit it was painful, but they're always trying to make the films better. It was never about ego or, make it more commercial, or, you know what I mean? Or it was always about, how you could make the films better. And they did, and we've had a great partnership.
Okay, I'm gonna go for one of these other questions. Let's see. What are some specific ways media entities, public media or otherwise, can better empower filmmakers of color in telling diverse stories?
I think one is to have the higher echelons of their structure, be people of color, be more diverse. I mean, that's just the way it works. We made a film, Black Panthers Vanguard of the Revolution, and we were in the edit room, and we had a whole section on women in the Black Panther Party, and in our rush to get it out there, and our craziness, me and the editor, who was another man, we kind of cut it out and cut it way down. And the producer, Lorenz Grant, was a woman, she said, what happened to that? That's really important. And we're like, yeah, you're right, and she was. I mean, like, that's one of the things that everybody remembers about the film, is the whole section on the Panther women. And it's just really important to have different voices around. So I think one of the things that has to get done is you have to have one, different people who are doing the hiring, doing the selecting of the stories, that top level. But you also have to have a pipeline. How do you get people to the level where they're producing and directing and doing all those, and editing, and you just have more diverse stories.
I'm gonna go to another audience question. You talked about how you, as a Black filmmaker, want to tell Black stories, and how you would like to see white filmmakers tell white stories, because sometimes there's access. There's an increased level of access that you can get when you look like the person you are interviewing or the main characters of your story. But I will say, there are, in these 3 films, as well as countless others you've made, there are these unbelievable moments where you get people like a white sheriff or, a former FBI agent to say something that's incredible, that is, interview gold. How do those things happen?
I don't know. I mean, I think that, I wonder. So I mean, I think I like to listen to people talk, especially when I'm filming. Maybe when I'm not filming, I don't really listen too much, but when I'm filming, I like to listen to people talk. I think that, it's it's well researched. We kind of pre-interview people, and we make notes. When we were doing the Murder of Emmett Till, one of the things that his cousin says, who was in the house when he was kidnapped, we were doing a pre-interview with no cameras, and I asked him, like, "Whoa, what was it like?" And he said it was dark as 1,000 midnights. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face when they came to take Emmett Till. And so I wrote that as a note. I wrote that in quotes, and I went back and got him to say it. When I got those guys to say, they wore crepe sole shoes. I got the women to say that they wore crepe sole shoes because I knew that's what they had said in the Look magazine article. So that's part of research, and part of it is just kind of just luck and gold. I think people want to talk. Listen to me for the last hour and a half. Talking about myself. People like to talk about themselves. They do. And a lot of times, we're talking to people who may not have been asked that much about themselves, and part of it is sometimes it's that they haven't been asked. Sometimes with Black folks, it's they're telling me something as a Black person that they you know that they wouldn't get a chance to tell. When we did the Black Panthers, I mean, the moment in that film, the one of the best moments I've ever filmed. I'm talking to one of the former Black Panthers. He's talking about the shootout in L.A. and he says, I said, they have the shootout with the cops, and they've fortified the Panther headquarters. They put sandbags up on the wall so the bullets won't come through, and the cops come. This is one of the first no-knock warrants that's ever been used. This is the first time they've ever used a no-knock warrant. They just come into there. And part of the Panthers' statements were always that you just don't let the police come in and harass you. No, they have no right to do it. So they don't knock. They break down the door, and the Panthers repel them, with guns, and they go into this long shootout with the cops. And I said to one of the Panthers, well, how did you feel? You're trapped there in this building. You're running out of bullets. You have no more bullets. They're bringing tanks outside now to get in. You're up against the whole LA police department. How did you feel? And he said, I felt free. That's how I felt. I felt free. I was making my own rules. I was a Black man making my own rules. I felt free. That's how I felt. You know what I mean? And he's talking to me as a Black man. He doesn't have to say, after 300 years of oppression, Bob, he doesn't have to explain anything. He's looking me dead in the eye and like, you know what I mean? And that's the moment. So look, that wasn't the greatest question in the world, but maybe I set him up, to give me that answer. I don't know, but it's part of, just kind of having that conversation.
Mm-hmm. 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 Stanley, one of the last audience questions that we'll probably take from YouTube. Do you feel any urgency in doing some more of these older, more historical pieces because some of the original participants are dying?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always an urgency. If you look at the range of, I mean, I guess I've been making films for a long time, but you want to get the stories down, but it's not like I'm looking at it and saying, okay, let me do a story about 1967 now, and let me do a story about. No, I mean it's great stories. As I say, we did Marcus Garvey. I mean, we found people who could remember Garvey. We found a woman who, when Garvey was deported, stood on the dock and could talk about it. She said I could remember him on the dock waving his handkerchief as the boat pulled out. And sure enough, there's a picture of him with the handkerchief, waving, and as the boat pulls out. So, I, I think there's, there's always an urgency to tell stories. But it's not like I'm, trying to say, okay, I got to tell a story about 73 before it's over.
What is it about history that is so appealing to you? Like, why this genre?
I don't know. I mean, I always want to say, look, I fell into it. The first film I made, independent film I made, was a film called $2 and a Dream about Madam C.J. Walker. And, I was like a young filmmaker at the time. And, my grandfather was her business partner. And so, I just kind of fell into an F.B. Ransom, as my grandfather, my mother's father. So I just kind of, I'm like out there, I'm like, wait a minute, there's a good story. I was surprised. I mean, I was embarrassed that it took me 5 years after I got out of film school to say, oh yeah, there's a good story. So, I made that film and, and I was like, okay, well, let me, one of the things I should try to do is another one. And so it's kind of rolled from there. But I found that I like it, I mean, history is kind of really, amazing, to look at. When I did $2 and a Dream, the story of Madam C.J. Walker, we used a lot of Black newspapers because, she had ads in Black newspapers and, stuff like that. And so the next film was Soldiers Without Swords, a film about Black newspapers. Because I just became fascinated with Black newspapers, that, I would, because we talk about Black people, in the 1920s, and people want to think, oh, well, all Black people were doing whatever, shining shoes or doing manual labor. But, I would look at those papers and I was like, wait a minute, this paper's had a Black editor, they had Black writer, they had a Black cartoonist, they had Black, a typesetter, what about all these people who were making their living at these Black institutions, at these newspapers. And so that's what kind of got me started on that road. And it's just kind of fascinating to think about that there's this whole other history that exists that we don't think about a lot.
Stanley, I said before that was probably our last question, and I think that triggered a bunch of people like, wait. So now there are a couple of questions about your advice to young filmmakers, aspiring documentary filmmakers, particularly filmmakers of color.
Yeah, I mean, I think look, if you're young, see a lot of docs, see a lot of documentaries. I mean, that's a simple thing to do. They're all online. The films we talked about now are all available. Emmett Till, Black Press. Freedom Riders and Freedom Summer are available. So are some of the other ones. But other people's films, they're all around. Just look at films. If you're just starting, think about making shorts, see some shorts. There's shorts all over, op docs from the New York Times, others, there's short docs all over, think about making one thing, think about, learn how to use the equipment, learn how to shoot, learn how to edit, even if you want to be a director, it's simple, you take a camera out and shoot. One of the things that somebody said to me early on, go shoot a dance performance, because following dancers is really hard to do and really interesting, and you learn how to use the camera, and then see what you like, look, but it's not brain surgery, it's like, everybody, like, look, you've never seen anybody operate on somebody's brain, probably. But you've seen a lot of films, whoever you are, you've seen a ton of films, what a film looks like, and be critical of yourself, start make a short, and you can make anything, like you make 5-minute film about the bodega. You can make a 5-minute film about, like in New York or other places where those people walk around the street and collect bottles, which I think is like an amazing thing, like to do that. I'm not going to rob somebody. I'm not going to commit a crime. I'm going to go and all night I'm going to go collect bottles, and like in New York, there are people, and there's families of people who do this. They're not, alcoholics or on drugs. It's just what they do, but there's a million things that you could do it, and just go for it. And again, when I came up, you couldn't see an old film unless you went to a art house movie theater, or they played an old movie on TV, or they showed it at your film school. Now I could name almost any film, and you can pull it up on your phone or your computer in 30 seconds and watch it. And so, and then the big thing is figure out if you like doing it, because my life is not doing interviews and winning awards. It's work.
Sage advice. Stanley, thank you so much for spending this time with us tonight. Personally, I must say I am desperately looking forward to your next American Experience film. I hope that there will be many more to come. But it was really just a pleasure to talk to you tonight. I thank you, our teams thank you, and we just really, really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So to all of you out there, thank you again for joining us tonight for this important and timely conversation. A special thanks to the World Channel for partnering with us for this event. All 3 films that we discussed tonight are available to stream in full on AmericanExperience.org. And please check out both the Civil Rights Collection on our website and the World Channel's Race in America collection on worldchannel.org. Again, thank you for spending the evening with us. Good night.
Thank you.